Emily Carter stared at the cracked screen of her phone while the apartment around her hummed with the tired sounds of an old building settling into another cold night. Somewhere in the hallway outside, pipes knocked behind the walls. A television played too loudly in the neighboring unit. The radiator beneath the window hissed unevenly, giving off more noise than heat. On the coffee table in front of her sat a stack of overdue bills held together with a fading rubber band. Electric, gas, medical. The rent notice folded beneath them. Past due. Final reminder. Emily pressed the heel of her hand against her forehead and shut her eyes for a second. Her daughter stirred in the bassinet beside the couch. 6-month-old Sophie let out a soft, uncomfortable whimper before curling tiny fingers against the thin blanket tucked around her body. Emily immediately leaned over. Hey, baby. I'm here." Her voice was hoarse from exhaustion. The pediatrician had warned her that the reflux might worsen before the specialty formula started helping. Sophie cried during feedings now. Sometimes she arched painfully in Emily's arms afterward, red-faced and shaking. The memory alone tightened Emily's chest. She picked up the nearly empty formula can from the table and tilted it. Barely enough for 1 bottle. Maybe 2 if she stretched it. She hated herself for even thinking that way. Her checking account balance glowed from the banking app on her phone. $2.13. Emily swallowed hard. The fluorescent lights at the grocery store earlier that afternoon flashed through her memory. She'd stood in the baby aisle for 20 minutes comparing prices she already knew she couldn't afford. One woman pushing a stroller had looked at her with impatient discomfort when Emily remained standing there too long. As if poverty itself were contagious. Emily had left without buying anything. Now Sophie needed another bottle before midnight. Emily rubbed at her burning eyes and opened her messages. James, her older brother, the only family member who still answered sometimes. She hesitated before typing. James, I hate asking again, but I really need help. Sophie's formula ran out sooner than I expected. Could you send $40 until Friday? I'll pay you back after my freelance deposit clears. Her thumb hovered over the send button. The shame was almost physical. At 30 years old, she was begging for formula money. 3 years ago, she had worked full-time in marketing for Bennett Healthcare Systems, one of the fastest-growing medical supply companies in the city. She'd had health insurance, savings, clean blouses hanging neatly in a closet. Then came the restructuring. Then the layoffs. Then Daniel. Then pregnancy. Then abandonment. Emily shut her eyes briefly. She pressed send before she could lose the nerve. A second later, her stomach dropped. The message thread looked unfamiliar. Wrong contact. No. Her fingers moved frantically across the screen. The number was 1 digit off. Before she could unsend it, a reply appeared. I think you have the wrong number. Heat flooded Emily's face. Humiliation swept through her so sharply she thought she might cry. She typed quickly. I'm so sorry. Please ignore that. Wrong person. She tossed the phone onto the couch cushion and covered her face with both hands. Sophie whimpered again. Emily immediately reached for her daughter. I know, sweetheart. I know. Her body ached from carrying tension for so long. The apartment smelled faintly of baby powder, cold coffee, and the damp wool coat hanging near the door that still hadn't dried completely from yesterday's rain. Her phone buzzed again. Emily stared at it reluctantly. Is your baby okay? She blinked. The stranger's message didn't feel invasive. Just careful. Still, caution immediately rose inside her. There were stories. Men pretending to help. People taking advantage. Emily stared at Sophie sleeping fitfully against her chest. Then she typed. She'll be okay. A pause. Another message arrived. What kind of formula does she need? Emily frowned. Why would a stranger care? Across the city, Lucas Bennett loosened his tie and leaned back in the leather chair of his office overlooking downtown. The 43rd floor of Bennett Healthcare headquarters was nearly empty at this hour. Only cleaning crews remained. Most nights Lucas worked late because going home felt worse. The divorce papers still sat unsigned inside his apartment. Not because he wanted to save the marriage. That had died quietly long before the lawyers became involved. No. He delayed signing because doing so would make certain failures permanent. His younger sister had once accused him of treating life like damage control. She wasn't wrong. Lucas stared again at the accidental message. Need $40 for baby formula. Something about it unsettled him. Not because of the money. Because of the desperation hidden inside such a small request. His company sold pediatric nutrition products to hospitals nationwide. He sat in meetings discussing quarterly profit margins on formulas mothers rationed in real kitchens every day. Last month, he'd approved another pricing increase after investors pushed aggressively during a board review. He'd justified it logically. Supply chain costs, market pressure, growth expectations. Now he pictured a woman staring at an empty can somewhere. His jaw tightened. He typed again. I'm not trying to intrude. I just want to know if your baby needs help tonight. Emily read the message while rocking Sophie slowly. Her instincts told her to stop responding, but exhaustion weakened every defense she had left. She typed carefully. She has reflux. The pediatrician switched her formula. It's expensive. A typing bubble appeared almost immediately. I can help. Emily laughed bitterly under her breath. Nothing came without strings. Not anymore. She learned that after Daniel disappeared the week she told him she was pregnant. At first he'd promised support. Then came excuses. Then silence. Then a blocked number. Emily stared at Sophie's tiny face. I won't make that mistake again, she whispered to herself. She typed, thank you, but I don't take money from strangers. Lucas read the message and exhaled slowly. Smart. At least she still protected herself. He typed again. Fair enough. I'm Lucas. Emily stared at the name. Lucas. It sounded normal. Not threatening. Still dangerous in its own way. Because kindness always became dangerous once you started needing it. Her phone buzzed. What formula? Emily hesitated. Then answered. Gently say R. Another pause. Then, what's your payment app? Emily's throat tightened. She almost put the phone down. But Sophie stirred painfully again, face scrunching. Emily looked toward the kitchen where 3 unpaid pharmacy receipts sat beside the sink. She finally sent the username. Seconds later, her phone vibrated. Transfer received for $100. Emily froze. Her heartbeat stuttered. For $100. Not 40. For 100. Her fingers trembled. This is too much. Lucas stared at the city lights through the office windows. No. What was too much was a mother diluting formula because she couldn't afford another can. Keep it. Another message followed. No mother should panic over feeding her baby. Emily blinked rapidly. Tears finally spilled down her cheeks. Not because of the money. Because someone had said the word mother like it mattered. Not burden. Not problem. Mother. Sophie stirred against her chest. Emily kissed the top of her daughter's head and whispered shakily, we're okay tonight. But even as relief flooded through her body, unease remained. Why would a stranger care this much? And why did his kindness feel so painfully sincere? The next morning arrived gray and wet. Rain streaked the apartment windows while Sophie fussed through another feeding. Emily moved slowly from exhaustion. The coffee she'd reheated twice tasted burnt and bitter. Her back ached from sleeping upright on the couch with Sophie against her chest after another reflux episode during the night. Still, there was formula in the kitchen. Diapers. Groceries. For the first time in weeks, Emily wasn't calculating every ounce. Her phone buzzed while she rinsed bottles in the sink. Did she sleep any better? Emily stared at the message. Not, did the baby sleep? Did she? Something about that unsettled her more than flirtation would have. Because it sounded like concern. Real concern. She typed back cautiously. A little. Lucas sat in the back seat of his town car reviewing acquisition reports on a tablet when her response arrived. He reread the single sentence twice. A little. The kind of answer people gave when they were too tired to explain the full truth. Sir. His assistant glanced at him carefully from the front seat. Board meeting moved to 11. Lucas nodded absently. Outside the window, downtown blurred beneath rain. His company occupied 3 glass towers and generated billions annually. Yet somehow the image stuck in his mind wasn't financial. It was a woman apologizing for asking $40 to feed her baby. He opened the company expense projections again. Pediatric formula margins. He stared at the numbers. Then closed the screen sharply. Emily spent the morning cleaning because anxiety always worsened when the apartment felt chaotic. She folded Sophie's tiny clothes carefully, wiped kitchen counters, ignored the cracks spreading across the ceiling near the bathroom. Every so often her phone buzzed. Lucas asking whether Sophie tolerated the formula. Lucas recommending a pharmacy nearby with lower prices. Lucas reminding her to refrigerate prepared bottles quickly because reflux babies were sensitive. It should have felt intrusive. Instead, it felt strangely grounding. as though someone else finally understood how fragile survival could become. Around noon, Sophie started crying harder than usual. Emily checked her temperature. 99.8. Not terrible. Still enough to trigger panic. She paced the apartment, bouncing Sophie carefully. It's okay. It's okay. But her own breathing had already turned shallow. Hospitals terrified her now. Not because of the bills. Because Sophie had spent 4 nights in neonatal care after birth, struggling to breathe. Emily still heard the monitor alarms sometimes while trying to sleep. Her phone buzzed. How's today going? Emily surprised herself by answering honestly. I think I'm just tired. A minute passed. Then, tired can feel a lot like panic when you haven't rested in months. Emily stopped pacing. Her eyes stung unexpectedly. How did he know that? She lowered herself carefully onto the couch with Sophie against her shoulder. The apartment felt very quiet suddenly. Finally, she typed, "Do you have kids?" Lucas stared at the question. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then he typed, "No." Another pause. "But I had someone I failed once." Emily reread the sentence slowly. Not polished. Not charming. Just heavy. Before she could ask more, another message came. "You don't have to answer this if it's too personal, but are you alone with her?" Emily stiffened immediately. Walls rose. Yes. Her answer was clipped. Lucas recognized the shift instantly. He regretted the question. "Sorry. You don't owe me explanations." Emily looked down at Sophie, curled sleepily against her shoulder. Most people disappeared once they realized single motherhood wasn't temporary. Babies were cute until exhaustion became visible. Until canceled plans. Until financial strain. Until someone else's responsibilities became inconvenient. She typed before she could overthink it. Her father left during the pregnancy. Lucas closed his eyes briefly. Something bitter twisted inside his chest. He thought about quarterly earnings, luxury conferences, investor dinners, and somewhere beneath all of it, women like Emily carried entire lives alone. His jaw tightened again. The truth was harder to ignore because his company wasn't innocent. 2 years earlier, Bennett Healthcare had acquired the pharmaceutical firm where Emily worked. Within 6 months, hundreds lost their jobs during restructuring. Lucas barely remembered approving the recommendations. Numbers. Efficiency. Necessary cuts. Now he wondered whether her name had once existed inside a spreadsheet he signed without hesitation. The thought lodged uncomfortably beneath his ribs. 3 days later, Emily stood inside a crowded pharmacy, balancing Sophie against one hip while calculating prices in her head. Even with the transfer from Lucas, she moved automatically into survival math. If she bought the larger formula container now, she could stretch the rest toward rent. But diapers were running low, and Sophie needed another pediatric visit next week. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A toddler screamed somewhere near checkout. Emily bounced Sophie gently while studying shelves. Her phone buzzed. "You should buy the larger container. Better value long term." Emily blinked. How did he know she was at the pharmacy? Then she remembered she'd mentioned needing to go earlier. Still, the timing unsettled her. "You're strangely invested in formula logistics." Lucas actually smiled faintly inside the conference room where 6 executives argued over manufacturing projections. Maybe because I spent 15 years pretending market reports were more important than the people buying the products. Emily stared at the response. Before she could answer, Sophie suddenly cried sharply. An older woman nearby glanced over with visible irritation. Emily immediately shifted away apologetically. The familiar embarrassment rose fast. Public motherhood felt like permanent performance. If the baby cried too long, people judged. If she looked exhausted, people judged. If she used assistance programs, people judged. She bounced Sophie carefully while unloading items at checkout. The total flashed. Higher than expected. Emily froze. Of course she'd forgotten wipes. The cashier waited impatiently. People behind her shifted. Heat crawled up Emily's neck. "You can put the wipes back," she said quietly. Then a voice behind her spoke. "Keep them." Emily turned. A tall man in a dark coat stepped forward holding out a card. For one disorienting second, her stomach dropped. Lucas? But no. Stranger. Different face. Still, the humiliation hit instantly. "No. Thank you," Emily said tightly. The man shrugged awkwardly and stepped back. The cashier cleared her throat impatiently. Emily paid quickly and left with Sophie before tears could rise. Outside, cold rain hit her face. Her hands shook while buckling Sophie into the stroller. Her phone buzzed. "Emily?" She stared at the screen. I'm fine. You don't sound fine. Emily laughed bitterly under her breath. The dangerous thing about being seen was that eventually someone noticed when you were falling apart. She typed before she lost courage. I hate needing help. Lucas read the message twice. Then slowly typed. Needing help and being abandoned aren't the same thing. Emily stopped moving. Rain soaked through the shoulders of her coat. For several long seconds, she couldn't breathe properly. Because that sentence hit too close to something she'd spent months refusing to name. She wasn't ashamed of motherhood. She was ashamed someone chose not to stay. Her throat tightened. Sophie made a soft, sleepy sound from the stroller. Emily wiped her face quickly and started walking home. That evening, Lucas arrived at his penthouse apartment long after dark. The place felt expensive and empty. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Designer furniture. Silence. He loosened his tie and poured whiskey he didn't actually want. His ex-wife Caroline once accused him of being emotionally absent even while physically present. At the time, he defended himself. Work pressure. Responsibility. Expansion. Now he wasn't so certain. Caroline had wanted children. Lucas kept delaying the conversation. Another quarter. Another acquisition. Another year. Eventually, she stopped asking. Then she stopped trying. The divorce should have been finalized months ago. Instead, they existed in legal limbo because neither wanted another brutal meeting with attorneys. Lucas stared down at his phone. Emily had stopped responding after getting home. He told himself that was good. Healthy. Boundaries. Still, he found himself wondering whether Sophie settled after the ring. Whether Emily ate dinner. Whether she slept. He hated how quickly concern became attachment. Especially because guilt sat underneath it. At midnight, he opened an old archived personnel report from Bennett Healthcare Acquisitions. He searched Emily Carter. Employee terminated during departmental consolidation. Marketing coordinator. Excellent performance history. No severance extension. Lucas leaned back slowly. A cold feeling spread through him. His company had eliminated her position 6 weeks before Sophie was born. He remembered that quarter. Investors praised aggressive restructuring. Stock values surged. He'd accepted congratulations while pregnant employees lost insurance. Jesus. Lucas closed the file. For the first time since receiving the accidental message, helping Emily no longer felt simple. Because he wasn't separate from her suffering. He was connected to it. Directly. Emily didn't hear from Lucas the next morning. Or the next. She told herself the silence shouldn't matter. Normal people moved on after accidental kindness. Still, disappointment lingered embarrassingly beneath her ribs. By Friday afternoon, she was back to juggling overdue notices at the kitchen table while Sophie napped nearby. Her freelance payment still hadn't arrived. Her landlord had taped another reminder to the apartment door. Final notice. Emily peeled it off before neighbors could stare. Humiliation lived in tiny moments now. Avoiding eye contact. Pretending everything was fine. Carrying groceries upstairs quickly so nobody noticed generic brands. The apartment buzzer suddenly rang. Emily stiffened. Landlord? Collection agency? She checked the intercom cautiously. Delivery for Emily Carter. I didn't order anything. Already paid for, ma'am. Emily frowned and buzzed him upstairs reluctantly. Minutes later, boxes filled the hallway outside her apartment. Diapers. Formula. Baby medicine. Groceries. Emily stared in shock. At the bottom sat an envelope. Inside was a short handwritten note. You don't have to carry everything alone every minute of the day. Emily sank slowly onto the couch. Anger rose unexpectedly beneath gratitude. Not because of the help. Because he made it look easy. Because she'd spent months drowning quietly while systems, employers, and people failed her. And one stranger solved immediate problems overnight. The unfairness of that hurt. Her phone buzzed. I hope that wasn't too intrusive. Emily stared at the message. Then typed honestly. Why are you doing this? Lucas sat alone in his office despite the late hour. Because I should have paid attention to people like you a long time ago. Emily frowned. What does that mean? Lucas looked toward the city lights. His thumb hovered above the screen. He could tell her now. About Bennett Healthcare. About the layoffs. About her position disappearing because executives wanted stronger quarterly reports. Instead, he typed, it means I know what happens when powerful people stop seeing human beings. Emily read the sentence slowly. Something heavy sat underneath his words. Not performance. Regret. For the first time, she wondered whether Lucas himself carried loneliness the same way she did. Quietly. Functionally. Hidden beneath competence. Sophie stirred awake and began fussing. Emily picked her up automatically. Okay. She bounced gently while opening one of the delivery bags. Fresh fruit, soup, crackers, even infant Tylenol. The carefulness of it nearly undid her. Nobody had looked this closely at her needs in a very long time. Not even when Daniel still lived with her. Especially not then. 2 weeks later, Sophie developed a fever. A real one. 103.1. Emily's hands shook while fastening Sophie into the car seat for the rideshare she could barely afford. Rain hammered the streets outside. Traffic crawled. The emergency room waiting area smelled like antiseptic and stale coffee. Children cried beneath harsh fluorescent lighting. A television mounted in the corner played muted daytime news no one watched. Emily bounced Sophie against her chest while filling out paperwork with trembling fingers. Insurance information. Emergency contact. She hesitated, then left the line blank. A nurse called them after 40 minutes. Sophie cried weakly during the examination. Emily felt panic rising steadily. Every beep from nearby monitors dragged her mentally back to the NICU. She could barely breathe. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Lucas, everything okay? Emily stared at the message through blurry vision. Hospital. That was all she typed. Lucas was already on his feet before replying. Which one? Emily hesitated, then answered. Mercy General. 25 minutes later, Emily sat curled in a plastic chair beside Sophie's hospital crib when a familiar, deep voice spoke softly nearby. Emily. She looked up sharply and froze. Lucas Bennett stood beside the curtain partition in a dark wool coat, still damp from rain. Tall, controlled, older than she'd imagined. Not flashy, not arrogant, just intensely present. For one stunned second, neither moved. Then Sophie whimpered weakly. Emily immediately reached for her daughter. Lucas watched the motion quietly. Something painful crossed his expression. You came? Emily whispered. Lucas nodded once. You sounded scared. The simplicity of that answer hit harder than dramatic declarations ever could. Emily suddenly became painfully aware of herself. Wrinkled sweatshirt. Hair tied carelessly. Dark circles. Hospital wristband. Lucas didn't seem to notice any of it. His attention stayed entirely on Sophie. What did the doctor say? Viral infection. They're monitoring dehydration because she hasn't been keeping bottles down. Emily's voice cracked slightly. Lucas pulled another chair beside hers without hesitation. Okay, he said calmly. Then we deal with that first. Not. Calm down. Not. It's probably nothing. Just, we deal with that first. Emily stared at him. No one had said we to her in months. Hours passed slowly. Lucas stayed. He brought coffee Emily barely drank. Spoke briefly with nurses. Walked laps with Sophie when Emily needed the restroom. At one point, Emily returned to find him standing near the window, holding Sophie carefully against his shoulder while she finally slept. The sight hit unexpectedly hard. Not romantic. Human. A tired man gently swaying beneath fluorescent hospital lights while rain streaked the glass outside. Lucas looked up when Emily approached. She likes movement, he said quietly. Emily nodded. Yeah. Their fingers brushed during the handoff. Both pulled back slightly. Silence settled. Then Emily looked at him carefully for the first time. Expensive coat. Tailored clothes. Controlled posture. There was money here. Power. Not the fantasy version. The exhausting version. The kind that changed how people moved through rooms. What do you do exactly? She asked quietly. Lucas went still. The question he'd been avoiding. He could lie. Delay. But after tonight, that felt worse somehow. I run Bennett Healthcare Systems. Emily frowned slightly. Then recognition slowly spread across her face. Bennett Healthcare. Her old company. Her termination paperwork. Her lost insurance. Her stomach dropped. Lucas saw the exact moment realization hit. Emily stood slowly. You own Bennett Healthcare? His silence answered. Color drained from her face. You laid people off while I was 8 months pregnant. The room suddenly felt too small. Lucas rose carefully. Emily, I lost my insurance because of your restructuring. Her voice shook now. Not loud. Worse. Controlled. I had to leave the apartment I shared with Sophie's father because I couldn't cover rent after the layoffs. Lucas swallowed hard. Every word landed exactly where it deserved. I didn't know about you. Specifically, he said quietly. Emily laughed once. A devastated sound. Of course you didn't. Sophie stirred restlessly between them. Emily picked her up immediately. Protective instinct overtaking everything. All this time. She shook her head. You felt guilty. Lucas didn't defend himself. Because she was right. Emily's eyes filled unexpectedly. Not from betrayal. From exhaustion. Do you know what it feels like to pray your baby doesn't get sick because you can't afford another emergency room bill? Lucas held her gaze. No, he admitted. The honesty disarmed her more than excuses would have. But I know I help build systems that force people into that fear every day. Silence stretched. Rain battered the windows harder. Hospital monitors beeped nearby. Finally, Emily whispered, I don't know what to do with that. Lucas nodded once. Neither do I. For the first time since meeting him, Emily saw something beneath the composure. Not savior. Not billionaire. A man carrying the unbearable realization that success had cost other people pieces of their lives. Sophie was discharged the following afternoon. Lucas drove them home because Emily was too exhausted to argue. The city moved slowly outside rain-fogged windows. Neither spoke much. Something fragile had shifted between them. Truth complicated kindness. But strangely, it also made Lucas feel more real. Flawed. Responsible. Human. At the apartment building, Emily hesitated before opening the car door. You don't owe me forgiveness, Lucas said quietly. Emily looked down at Sophie, sleeping in the carrier. Then back at him. I know. Another pause. But I also know you stayed at the hospital when you didn't have to. Lucas exhaled slowly. Not absolution. Just truth. Emily climbed out carefully. Halfway toward the building, she turned back. Why did you really answer that text? Lucas leaned against the steering wheel for a second before answering. Because I think I've spent years becoming the kind of man who notices numbers faster than people. Emily held his gaze. The honesty hurt. Because she believed him. And Sophie? She asked softly. Lucas's expression shifted. She deserved better than silence from someone capable of helping. Emily looked away quickly. Her throat tightened unexpectedly. Inside the apartment that night, she fed Sophie slowly beneath dim kitchen light. The city outside blurred with rain. Everything still felt uncertain. Rent remained overdue. Exhaustion remained constant. Lucas remained complicated. But something inside her had changed. For months, Emily believed suffering made people invisible. Disposable. Tonight, for the first time in a very long while, she felt seen. Not rescued. Seen. The following weeks unfolded carefully. Not romance. Not fantasy. Something quieter. Lucas called sometimes. Mostly about Sophie. Sometimes about nothing important. Emily remained cautious. She argued with him when he offered too much help. Refused expensive gestures. Corrected him when he spoke too clinically about social problems. Lucas listened more than he defended himself. That mattered. One evening he admitted he was freezing another round of formula price increases despite investor backlash. One policy change doesn't erase what happened, Emily said. I know, Lucas answered. And he sounded like he truly did. Another night, Emily confessed she still checked Sophie's breathing several times while sleeping. Lucas didn't tell her she was overreacting. He simply stayed on the phone quietly until her breathing steadied too. Slowly trust formed. Not because Lucas had money. Because he remained present after discomfort entered the story. Most people left then. He didn't. One cold evening near Christmas, Lucas arrived outside Emily's building carrying groceries, and a tiny stuffed elephant Sophie immediately grabbed with delighted hands. Emily laughed softly despite herself. You're going to spoil her. Lucas looked down at Sophie chewing happily on the elephant's ear. I think she deserves it. Emily watched him carefully. There were still shadows beneath his eyes. Still guilt. Still unresolved damage. But there was effort too. Real effort. Later, after Sophie finally fell asleep, Emily stood beside Lucas near the apartment window overlooking wet city streets. Snow had begun falling lightly. Traffic moved below in blurred ribbons of red and white. I spent a long time thinking asking for help made me weak, Emily admitted quietly. Lucas leaned against the wall beside her. And now, Emily stared toward the snow. Now I think surviving alone for too long changes people. Lucas nodded slowly. Yeah, it does. Silence settled comfortably. Not empty. Resting. Emily looked towards Sophie sleeping nearby. Then back at Lucas. I'm still angry about what happened, she said honestly. You should be, Lucas answered. No defensiveness. No attempt to soften consequences. Just acceptance. Emily studied him quietly. For the first time she realized healing didn't always arrive as dramatic rescue. Sometimes it arrived slowly. In accountability. In presence. in someone staying after the truth became inconvenient. Lucas glanced toward her carefully. I don't expect you to trust me completely yet. Emily surprised herself with a faint, tired smile. Good. Because I don't. A soft laugh escaped him. Real. Human. Sophie stirred sleepily in the bassinet. Emily immediately crossed the room. Lucas watched her gently adjusting the blanket. Exhaustion still visible in every movement despite the small improvements around them. The apartment remained modest. Bills still existed. Nothing magical had erased hardship. But warmth lived here now too. Something steadier. Emily looked up and found Lucas watching them. For a second neither spoke. Then Sophie reached tiny fingers toward him sleepily. Lucas hesitated before stepping closer. Very carefully, he touched her small hand. Emily watched the moment quietly. Not as fantasy. Not as rescue. Just three emotionally bruised people standing inside a small apartment while snow fell beyond the windows. Trying, in their own imperfect ways, to become less alone. And for now, somehow, that was enough.